Chapter 7, Key Issue 3, is about conflict that arises between different ethnicities. So we'll talk about the difference between ethnicity and nationality, and we'll talk about the principal ethnicities and the conflicts in Lebanon and Sri Lanka. We'll also talk about the Kurds and different ethnicities in South Asia, and how these ethnicities are divided among more than one nationality. And we'll identify and describe the principal ethnicities in Western Asia as well. Keep in mind this is an overview, so make sure you're reading the book because the book will go into more detail. And this is a really complex topic, far more complex than I can do credit with one quick PowerPoint lecture. So let's talk about ethnicity and nationality. So nationality is an identity with a group of people who share a legal attachment and a personal allegiance to a particular country. And nationality has a lot of similarities with ethnicity. So both nationality and ethnicity can be defined through shared cultural values that can be derived from religion or language or material culture. And so what it means to be American, right, like an American citizen, has many of the shared material culture values as like an African American ethnicity group would have, or like the Hispanic American ethnicities, they would have so many shared cultural experiences from religion, language, and material culture. So how is nationality different from ethnicity? That really has to do with your legal standing. So nationality has to do with shared experiences that can be derived from voting, so African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, European Americans, all of these people can vote in the United States, or allegedly should be able to vote equally. You should be able to obtain a passport. The civic duties are the same, like you're supposed to serve as a jury, you're supposed to follow the law, pay your taxes. All these experiences are shared national beliefs. And again, the shared national experience can have many things in common with your ethnicity. So when we look at nationality in North America, again, like nationality means that you are a citizen of the United States. And ethnicity would break you up from distinct ancestry or cultural traditions. And so African Americans, Hispanic Americans. And then when we look at race again, race distinguishes essentially the genetic probability of, the amount of melanin you have in your skin. So let's look at some global problems about ethnic and national conflict. So in Lebanon, even though everybody in Lebanon would consider themselves, from a national standpoint, Lebanese, there's a great deal of ethnic competition, which has led to conflict. So in Lebanon, there are a large number of both Christians and a large number of Muslims. The Lebanese Christians consider themselves ethnically Phoenician, so they are descended from the ancient Phoenician population. Whereas the Muslims in Lebanon would consider themselves descended from Arabs. So ethnically, we have people descended from the Phoenicians and people descended from Arabs. The diversity in Lebanon at the surface might appear to be more religious than ethnic, and sometimes it's hard to tell, but at the heart of the conflict is the idea that there are 128 parliamentary seats. And since 1989 in Lebanon, they've been divided equally between Christian and Muslim populations. But when Lebanon first gained its independence from the European colonial powers, there were more parliamentary seats given to Christians than there were Muslims. And as the percentage of Christians in Lebanon decreased, this inequality led to civil war. Today, the majority of the population is Muslim. So the problem with dividing parliamentary seats even equally today between religions is that there are less Christians than there are Muslims. So that still seems unfair. If you're Muslim, why should Christians have equal say? I think we then get into the problem with when you decide, elected government positions based on a religion or ethnicity, you end up having problems when those percentages change later. To make things, more complicated within Lebanon, you have more Shiite Muslims than Sunni Muslims, but the Sunni Muslims have greater social and political status, so more power, more money. They're more likely to live in urban areas. They have better access to jobs and education. And the Christian population in Lebanon is primarily Marmonite, which is a branch of Christianity that's very similar to Roman Catholics. You also have some Roman Catholics. You also have Armenian Orthodox and some Greek Orthodox. But the Christians also tend to have more wealth and power than certainly the Shiite Muslims, and more in some cases than Muslims in general. And so if you look at the map of Lebanon, you can see this is the area where Christians are primarily concentrated. And then you can see here are where the Sunni Muslims are primarily concentrated. So Beirut, although Beirut also has a lot of Christians in it. So you've got Sunni Muslims down here, right here near Syria. And then you have way more Shiite Muslims, but they don't have as much political power or wealth. And then you have a smaller group of Muslims called the Druze. And they live here just south of Beirut and next to Syria. And so all of this has led to a great deal of conflict. So in fact, right before the Syrian refugee crisis, there were a great deal of Lebanese refugees fleeing to Syria. And so then when the Syrian civil war started, we had all these Lebanese refugees going back home, but now we've got tons of Syrian refugees living in Lebanon, which just really adds to the conflict. I think that the numbers are 1 in 4 people in Lebanon right now are actually a refugee from Syria. So that certainly adds to the conflict and the tension in Lebanon. In Sri Lanka, we also have some ethnic competition. So Sri Lanka is inhabited by 3 principal ethnicities: the Sinhalese, who migrated from India in the 5th century. They're primarily Buddhist. That's about 74% of the country. Then you have the Tamil, about 16%. They also migrated from India, but in the 3rd century, and they are Hindu. And then you have the Moors, which are ethnically Arabic, and they came from Southwest Asia in the 8th century, and they practice Islam. If you look at Sri Lanka, you do have the majority of the people are Sinhalese, primarily Buddhist, and they do control the majority of the government. They passed a law making Sinhalese the only official language, which meant if you were ethnically Tamil or ethnically Moor, it became much harder for you to get a job or go to school, particularly if you didn't speak Sinhalese. They also made the official religion Buddhist. So since Buddhism is the official religion of Sri Lanka, it meant that positions for the Hindu Tamils or the Islamic Moors at places like universities suddenly were drastically reduced. So because of the policies of the Sinhalese majority, it's led to a great deal of conflict and civil war in Sri Lanka. In fact, the Tamil warriors, the freedom fighters, were called the Tamil Tigers, and they are credited with modern-day child soldier techniques. So that's not really something to be, proud of, but it's led to a great deal of fighting and conflict in Sri Lanka. And you can see that in Sri Lanka, that the Tamil group feels that they are being persecuted. They don't have equal representation. Their language isn't represented. Their religion isn't represented. And then small groups of them then commit terrorist acts. So there's death on both sides. But for the last unit, when some of you didn't understand why preservation of language was important, I understand that if there's only a few people left, maybe it doesn't seem important. But in places like Sri Lanka, making only one language, the language of power in a country, when you have 3 major ethnic groups, can lead to civil war. So language matters. It's part of someone's identity. Sometimes ethnicities are divided. So you can have an ethnic group that inhabits an area and that no longer matches the territory of a nationality. So in South Asia, when Britain had the colonial rule of the Indian subcontinent, when they ended their colonial power in 1947, they really had 2 new countries, India and Pakistan. Pakistan consisted of 2 areas that were not connected, called West and East Pakistan, although in 1971, East Pakistan became Bangladesh. And why did they separate it? Pakistan and what later became Bangladesh was separated from India because of their ethnicity. So people in India are primarily Hindu, and people here in Pakistan and Bangladesh are primarily Muslim. And people in Pakistan and Bangladesh would have considered themselves descended from Arabic people. So they speak different languages, they have different religions. And tensions were so high here that we had a large outflux of Indian migrants. Also, when they were separating the country borders, you can see that Muslims were moving quickly into Pakistan and Hindus were quickly moving into India because it was a dangerous, bloody time. In fact, this border here and this border here are considered some of the most dangerous border areas in the world. The Kurds are also an ethnic group that's divided among many nations. So they are a nation without a state. They are Sunni Muslims, and they speak a language in the Iranian group of the Indo-European Iranian branch of the Indo-European language. They have distinctive literature, dress, and cultural traditions, and they don't have their own country. After World War I, the European allies demarcated a land for the Kurds called Kurdistan, and Kurdistan would have been part of what is now today Turkey, but that didn't work out. So today the Kurds are divided among several countries: eastern Turkey, northern Iraq, western Iran, and Syria. And so this here is a picture of Kurdish freedom fighters protesting. And the Kurdish freedom fighters have been essential in the war against ISIS most recently. We also have different distributions in Western Asia. So, for example, in Iraq, 3/4 of Iraqis are Arabs. The majority of the country is Shiite Muslims, 1/3 are Sunni, and 1/6 of Iraqs are Kurds. In Iraq, they have stronger loyalty to their tribe or their clan than they do overall to a nationality or major ethnicity, which makes resolving conflicts in Iraq difficult because they are more likely to identify to their tribe than they are to Iraq as a whole. In Iran, the most numerous ethnicity is Persian, and they are Shiite Muslims. And Iran is one of the few countries that Shiite Muslims are the majority and they're in power. And make sure you read in your book about the conflict with the U.S. and Iran. The ethnic diversity in Western Asia also includes the problems in Afghanistan. So we have ethnicities including in Afghanistan and the Pashtun, the Tajik, and the Hazara. A small group of the Pashtun are called the Taliban, which means religious students. And in 1995, they gained control over most of the country. And they proceeded to rule with policies based on Islamic fundamentalism or Sharia law. Afghanistan was actually ruled by the Soviet Union until 1989. And in what we call a proxy war, the U.S. Helped the rebels who were fighting against the Soviet Union from 1979 to 1989. So we provided intelligence, weapons, money, and funding to the Mujahideen, who later became the Pashtun or the Taliban. So we were helping them. We aligned with Saudi Arabia. We were meeting with rebels in Pakistan to kind of help them. And so later, when the Pashtun came to power and the Taliban came to power, we kind of helped that. And later, it became very detrimental to us in our war on terror. In fact, we helped work with groups that later, foreign groups that moved in that later became Al-Qaeda. So we kind of helped that happen because we wanted Russia to not be successful. In Pakistan, the most numerous ethnicity is Punjabi. So if you see West Asia, which what we usually refer to as the Middle East, you can see how many different ethnicities are spread throughout. And so obviously this is an area of conflict because there are many ethnicities within these countries, but many of the borders that are established in these countries were established not based on ethnic or religious affiliation, but instead were established with arbitrary lines through colonial powers, similar to that in Africa. So this leads to conflict within a country. So these can be difficult issues to resolve. So like we were talking about the Kurds, and you can see right here, there's Kurdish people here, and throughout here. Here, if we just look at Iraq a little bit closer, you can see the breakdown of different ethnicities within Iraq. And then if you even blow up a little bit closer, so you can see most of like Baghdad, you can see the same kind of problem.